The name H. Holmes sends shivers down the spines of even the most hardened historian. His story is one of the darkest chapters in American history, a tale of deception, manipulation, and cold-blooded murder that continues to haunt the collective memory of a nation. Born Herman Webster Mudgett, he became a phantom, a specter haunting the gaslit streets of late 19th century Chicago. His transformation from a seemingly ordinary man to a monstrous figure is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul. Holmes was a true monster, a predator who turned the bustling energy of the 1893 World's Fair into his own hunting ground. The fair, meant to be a celebration of human achievement and progress, became a backdrop for his sinister activities. Amidst the marvels and wonders, Holmes saw an opportunity to exploit the influx of visitors for his own nefarious purposes. He was a pioneer in darkness, etching his name in blood as America's first serial killer. His methods were as varied as they were gruesome, and his ability to evade suspicion for so long speaks to his cunning and ruthlessness. His crimes, a macabre tapestry of manipulation, torture, and cold-blooded murder, continue to shock and horrify to this day. The sheer scale of his atrocities, combined with his meticulous planning, make him one of the most infamous figures in criminal history. Holmes was a master manipulator. He had an uncanny ability to read people, to understand their desires and fears, and to use that knowledge to his advantage. His charm was his most potent weapon, allowing him to gain the trust of his victims before revealing his true nature. He wore charm like a mask, his handsome features and quick wit disarming his victims. To those who met him, he appeared to be a successful, well-spoken gentleman, a facade that hid the monster within. He preyed on the vulnerable, the lonely, the dreamers drawn to the promise of the White City. Many of his victims were young women who had come to Chicago in search of a better life, only to find themselves ensnared in his deadly web. Little did they know they were stepping into a nightmare. Holmes's charm and the allure of the World's Fair masked the true horror that awaited them. Holmes was a cunning architect of terror, and his masterpiece was a building that would become synonymous with his evil, the Murder Castle. This structure, designed with a labyrinth of secret passages, trapdoors, and soundproof rooms, was a house of horrors where many met their untimely end. The Murder Castle stands as a grim testament to Holmes's ingenuity and malevolence, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred, and where the true extent of human depravity was laid bare. Herman Webster Mudgett, the man who would become H. Holmes, was born in New Hampshire on May 16, 1861. His early years were spent in a quaint village, surrounded by the serene beauty of rural New England. Yet, beneath this picturesque setting, a dark seed was already taking root in young Herman's mind. Even as a child, there were whispers of unsettling behavior, a darkness that hinted at the monster he would become. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about his cruel treatment of animals, and his unnerving fascination with death. These early signs were ominous, foreshadowing the horrors that lay ahead. He was fascinated by death, by anatomy, by the fragility of the human body. This morbid curiosity was not just a passing phase, it was an obsession that consumed him. He would spend hours poring over anatomical drawings and medical texts, driven by a relentless desire to understand the inner workings of the human form. This morbid curiosity led him to the University of Michigan Medical School, where he excelled in his studies. His academic prowess was undeniable, and he quickly gained a reputation as a brilliant student. However, his peers and professors were unaware of the sinister thoughts that lurked behind his intense gaze. But Holmes's ambition was twisted, his brilliance tainted by a chilling lack of empathy. He viewed his fellow humans not as individuals with their own hopes and dreams, but as mere subjects for his experiments. His cold, calculating nature made him a dangerous man, capable of unspeakable acts. He saw the human body not as a sacred vessel, but as a plaything, a puzzle to be dissected and manipulated. His time in medical school only served to deepen his obsession, providing him with the knowledge and skills he would later use to horrific ends. He reveled in the power he felt when holding a scalpel, the thrill of cutting into flesh and bone. He craved power over life and death, a craving that would eventually consume him. This insatiable desire drove him to commit acts of unimaginable cruelty, all in the name of his twisted quest for control. He believed that by mastering the secrets of life and death, he could elevate himself above ordinary men, becoming a god in his own right. Upon graduation, he abandoned the ethical constraints of medicine and embarked on a sinister path, drawn to the anonymity of a booming Chicago on the cusp of the 1893 World's Fair. The bustling city provided the perfect backdrop for his nefarious activities, a place where he could blend in and carry out his dark deeds without arousing suspicion. It was here that he would construct his infamous murder castle, a labyrinthine structure designed to trap and kill his unsuspecting victims. The World's Fair brought thousands of visitors to Chicago, many of whom would never leave, falling prey to Holmes's insidious schemes. His reign of terror had begun, and the city would never be the same. In the shadow of the World's Fair's grandeur, Holmes began to construct his masterpiece of malice. He purchased a lot in the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago and began work on what would become known as the Murder Castle. Outwardly, it appeared to be an unassuming three-story building, housing a hotel, shops, and various rented rooms. But behind the mundane facade, a labyrinth of horror was taking shape. Holmes designed the building himself, his architectural knowledge twisted to serve his dark purpose. He included secret passageways, hidden rooms, and soundproofed chambers. Staircases led to dead ends, doors opened to brick walls, and gas jets could be controlled remotely, filling rooms with deadly fumes. It was a house of horrors, specifically designed to trap and exterminate its unsuspecting inhabitants. Stepping inside the murder castle was like entering the belly of a beast. Its hallways were designed to confuse and disorient. Guests could easily lose their way in the maze-like corridors, their cries for help swallowed by the thick walls and soundproofed rooms. Holmes took a perverse pleasure in watching his victims wander aimlessly, their fear growing with each passing moment. For those unfortunate enough to be marked for death, Holmes had devised a terrifying array of methods. Some rooms were outfitted as gas chambers, their air vents connected to lines that could be flooded with toxic fumes at his whim. Others contained trapdoors that sent victims plummeting into soundproofed basement vaults, their screams muffled by tons of brick and mortar. The basement of the murder castle was Holmes's domain, a gruesome workshop of death. It was a place where the light of day never reached, and the air was thick with the scent of fear and decay. The walls seemed to whisper the secrets of the countless souls who had met their end here. Here he indulged his darkest fantasies, dissecting bodies on a surgical table, experimenting with different poisons, and perfecting his methods of murder. Each experiment was a step closer to his twisted idea of perfection. He stripped his victims of anything of value, meticulously cataloging each item. Rings, watches, and other personal effects were removed with a cold, clinical precision, as if they were mere objects in his macabre collection. Bones were cleaned and articulated, each one handled with a disturbing reverence. They were then sold to medical schools or transformed into grotesque ornaments, a testament to his morbid creativity. He sawed bodies apart, each cut a deliberate act of defilement. The flesh was dissolved in acid vats, a bubbling cauldron of death that left no trace behind. The acid vats were his solution to the problem of disposal, reducing human remains to nothing more than a foul-smelling sludge. For those remains that couldn't be dissolved, he hid them in lime pits, the caustic substance slowly erasing any evidence of his crimes. The stench of decay permeated the building, a constant reminder of the horrors hidden within. It was a smell that clung to the walls, the floors, and the very air itself. But Holmes remained unfazed. He moved through the darkness with a sense of purpose, his mind always calculating, always planning his next move. He saw himself as an artist, his victims as his raw materials. Each life he took was a brushstroke on his canvas of death. He was a sculptor of flesh and bone, his hands crafting horrors that defied imagination. The remains of his victims were his medium, each one a piece of his grotesque masterpiece. He reveled in the fear he instilled, in the absolute power he wielded over life and death. To him, each scream, each plea for mercy was a symphony of terror that fueled his dark desires. His canvas was the dark underbelly of Chicago, a city teeming with life and yet oblivious to the horrors lurking in its shadows. The alleys and streets were his hunting grounds, each corner a potential stage for his next act of violence. He reveled in the fear he instilled, in the absolute power he wielded over life and death. The terror in his victims' eyes was a reflection of his own twisted soul, a mirror that showed him the depths of his depravity. In his mind, he was not just a killer, but a master of his craft, a dark genius whose work would be remembered long after he was gone. And in the shadows of the murder castle, his legacy of terror was etched into the very fabric of the building, a chilling reminder of the evil that once walked its halls. The 1893 World's Fair brought millions of visitors to Chicago, many seeking lodging in the city's boarding houses and hotels. Holmes, with his charm and charisma, had no trouble attracting guests to his World's Fair hotel. Single women, traveling salesmen, young couples hoping for a romantic getaway, all were lured into his web of deception. Whispers of strange occurrences began to circulate. Guests would check in but never check out. Screams were heard in the night, followed by an eerie silence. The stench of death lingered in the air, masked by strong perfumes and the ever-present scent of disinfectant. But Holmes, a master manipulator, always had an explanation, a plausible lie to quell suspicion and maintain his facade of normalcy.